Semester number 2, lesson number 16. Our aim today is how did the Roaring Twenties lead to a sense of false security in the United States? And as we've been talking about in class, the Roaring Twenties was a time of really, throwing caution to the wind, having fun, enjoying life, spending money. And we're going to, see that some of that money that was being spent wasn't really money that the people had. All right? And that's going to be in our future lessons when we talk about the Great Depression. But, we're going to see that during the Roaring Twenties, everything in America just seemed to feel good and it seemed to feel right. So this is going to lead them into this false sense of security, which eventually that bubble is going to pop and they're going to, have problems because of it. So the first thing we're going to talk about are young women changing the rules, and which most of you guys from our gallery walk, all right, you saw the picture of the flappers, and a flapper was an emancipated young woman who embraced the new fashions and urban attitudes of the day. Close-fitting hats, bright waistless dresses an inch above the knees, which was unheard of for the time. Dresses usually before this had to be down to the ankles. Skin-toned silk stockings and sleek pumps. These were women who broke the mold. All right, they didn't want to fit into society's quote-unquote norms, and they really wanted to have fun and change the way women were viewed. So women and equal rights. Women became more assertive in their bid to gain equality. They began smoking cigarettes, drinking in public, and talking openly about sex. And the attitudes towards marriage changed. There was more dating going on, and it wasn't all just about young women meeting a man and getting married. They would casually date. They would go out with friends to go out for the night, and they'd meet people. And it wasn't really just about women as a means to have a child and then become a housewife. They started to have a little more fun and enjoy life a little more. So the double standard. Before World War I, men only courted women they intended to marry. During the 1920s, as I said, casual dating became increasingly accepted. However, there was a double standard, which, we'll probably discuss this in class. Does this double standard still exist today, where men were granted greater sexual freedom than women? And we'll talk about that idea in class today. But in the 1920s, men were not just a one-woman person. They went from woman to woman, and that really was just the norm. Whereas if a woman did that, it wouldn't look good. So now we're going to get into the effects of mass consumption. And a person we watched a little bit in the video we watched the other day was Henry Ford and his development of the assembly line, which brought about mass production. All right, this assembly line, this concept of the assembly line, all day long, the worker's one job is to put on the steering wheel. All day long, another worker's job is just to put on the lug nut. All day long, another worker's job is just to put on the wheels. And this was a quick, easy, efficient way to get people, goods at a cheaper rate. Cars were being produced at a much quicker rate. All right, during the height, one every 24 seconds, I believe, was the highest output. And the best part about that, in terms of Ford's assembly line, was you didn't really need to have skilled workers. They just needed to know one thing and do it about 1,000 times a day. All right, the number of American cars increased from 1.5 million in 1919 to 4.7 million in 1929. And I put at the bottom here, how did this lead to an increase in other industries? I want you to think about that. So how can people afford these cars? These cars were 3 months' salary. All right, so it really wasn't a cheap thing. It was quite an investment. How did they buy them? They used installment buying, only paying for part of something at first and paying for the rest in monthly installments. And I want you to think about this. First time this was introduced, people really don't understand the concept greatly. How did this lead to people plunging into deep debt? And I want you to think about not taking things into account and whatnot. And we'll talk more about that in class. At the same time in the 1920s, the Harlem Renaissance is taking place in Upper Manhattan. And in the 1920s, a number of talented African Americans, literature, music, acting, and dancing, brought a new acclaim to Harlem, a black neighborhood in New York City. Jazz developed in New Orleans, and by the 1920s, this music was popular in Chicago and New York City. All right, the Harlem Renaissance was the time of real. Um, they call it a Renaissance. If you remember Renaissance from world history, Renaissance means rebirth. All right, but really what they were doing was this was the first opportunity they had to really spread the black culture in America openly, and they showed the great contributions they made to literature, music, acting, dancing, etc. At the same time, you have new entertainment. Hollywood, California became the new movie capital with stars such as Charlie Chaplin, who's on the bottom of this page, bottom right corner. In 1927, the first movie with sound came out, and this created a common culture. All right, this really was the rise of not only Hollywood but America as the entertainment capital of the world, and it's going to be something which is both a positive and a negative because sometimes countries are going to look at us in a certain light because of our entertainment value. Our first check for understanding. The flappers of the 1920s gained public attention mainly because they A. refused to conform to society's expectations, B. fought for the right of women to vote, C. fled the United States to live in Europe, or D. worked for equal status in employment. And we'll go over that question tomorrow. The second question. The 1920s are sometimes called the Roaring Twenties because 1. Foreign trade prospered after World War I. 2. The United States assumed a leadership role in world affairs. 3. Political reforms made government more democratic. Or 4. Widespread social and economic change occurred. And we will talk about that question as well. Your class reaction, we will watch a short little 6-minute clip on the Harlem Renaissance, and I want you to answer this. Why was the Harlem Renaissance such an important time period for African Americans? Why was it an important time period for the United States in general? Explain using examples from the movie clip. And we will talk more about this tomorrow in class. Have a good night.